All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going on a fascinating journey into the world of psychology.
Oh, sounds intriguing.
It is. But don't worry, we're not going to be cracking open any text picks. You've sent in some really thought-provoking questions from Psychology in Everyday Life by Myers and DeWall, and we're going to see what kind of cool insights we can unearth.
I love that book.
Me too.
Yeah.
You're curious about things like um, why we forget stuff, right?
Yeah.
How our childhood experiences affect us,
Yeah.
and even the impact of different parenting styles.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is. And of course, we can't forget about psychological disorders. That's always a bit of a mystery, isn't it?
Absolute.
One question that stood out was, how do biological, psychological, and social cultural factors all contribute to these disorders?
It is a big one. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but with pieces from different boxes.
Right.
But luckily, psychologists have a model for this, the biopsychosocial model.
Ooh, I like that.
It helps us understand how these different pieces, biological, psychological, and social cultural, all fit together to influence mental health.
Okay, so it's not just about genetics or our upbringing.
Right.
It's a whole web of influences, right?
Exactly. Imagine someone who's genetically predisposed to anxiety.
Okay,
They might never develop an actual anxiety disorder if they have a really supportive upbringing and learn healthy coping mechanisms.
that makes sense.
But if they experience some kind of major trauma or a really difficult period, that predisposition could be triggered.
Oh, wow.
It's all about how these factors interact, you see.
That is a great way to explain it. So how does this model play out with specific disorders? You mentioned OCD and PTSD in your question list.
Oh, good ones. Let's take OCD. On the biological side, there might be irregularities in certain brain circuits that regulate things like anxiety and impulsive behavior.
Okay.
But then on the psychological side, we see these learned behaviors, the rituals and compulsions people develop to cope with their anxieties.
Right.
And the social cultural piece can influence how these anxieties manifest and are perceived. Like, are certain fears more common in certain cultures, for example?
So it's kind of like a feedback loop.
Right.
Like the anxiety fuels the compulsions, but the compulsions, even though they provide temporary relief,
Mm-hmm.
they actually end up reinforcing the anxiety.
Exactly. Now, with PTSD, it's usually triggered by some kind of traumatic event, like a war or an assault.
Right.
And that has a huge impact on the brain's stress response system. But the way it develops, how severe it is, that can be influenced by things like social support or cultural norms around expressing emotions, even access to mental health care.
So even with something as seemingly straightforward as PTSD, it's still a whole mix of factors that determine how it unfolds.
Exactly. Now let's look at substance abuse, for example. We see the interplay again. There's a genetic component for sure, making some people more susceptible to addiction.
Right.
Then you have psychological factors. Things like impulsivity or a history of trauma can also make someone more vulnerable.
And then the social and cultural influences.
Right, like peer pressure or the availability of certain substances in a particular environment, those can be major triggers.
It's fascinating how all of these pieces fit together.
It is.
You also mentioned schizophrenia. How does that fit into this model?
Oh, absolutely. Schizophrenia is a really complex disorder,
Yeah.
but we know there's a strong genetic component involved, affecting how the brain processes information. And then environmental factors, like if someone was exposed to certain viruses before they were born or extremely stressful life events, can also increase the risk.
So it's never really just one simple answer, huh?
Nope, it's always a combination of these things. And it shows just how important it is to look at mental health from a holistic perspective. Like with anorexia, for example.
Oh, yeah.
You see biological predispositions, perhaps towards anxiety or perfectionism, interacting with those intense societal pressures around body image.
That's such a good point. It's easy to forget that eating disorders aren't just about vanity. They're rooted in some deep psychological and biological factors.
Absolutely. Now, you also asked about how we can manage anxiety and depression by changing our thinking.
Yes.
And that leads us to the world of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBT. I'm so curious about that. Is it really possible to actually reprogram our brains to feel less anxious or depressed?
Well, it's not really about erasing those negative thoughts completely. It's more about learning to recognize them and challenge them.
So it's kind of like being a more objective observer of your own thoughts.
Exactly. CBT gives you practical tools and techniques to help you do this. One is called cognitive restructuring. Let's say you're constantly worrying about some worst-case scenario.
Oh, I do that all the time.
We all do. CBT helps you to identify that negative thought, challenge its validity, and then replace it with something more balanced and realistic.
I love that. It's like taking your negative thoughts to court and demanding evidence.
Exactly. Another technique is exposure therapy. This is especially helpful for phobias or anxiety disorders. It's about gradually and safely exposing yourself to the thing you fear.
To kind of desensitize yourself.
Yes. And over time, this helps reduce the anxiety associated with it.
That makes so much sense. I used to be terrified of public speaking, but I started by just practicing in front of some friends, small groups, then gradually worked my way up to larger audiences. It was scary at first, but definitely got easier with practice.
That's a perfect example. It's about facing your fears and proving to yourself that you can handle them.
It's really empowering, actually.
It is. Now, you also had a question about why we forget things.
Yeah. Why is that? It's so frustrating. Like, I can remember these random facts from years ago, but then I can't recall what I had for dinner last night.
Well, forgetting is actually totally normal. It's part of how our brains work. If we remembered everything, we would be completely overwhelmed.
That's true.
To understand it, we need to look at how memories are formed in the first place. It's not just about information disappearing. It's about how our brains access and retrieve it.
Okay, I see. But are there different kinds of forgetting? Because sometimes I feel like I just can't recall something, but then other times it's like I totally blank on something that I should know.
You're right. There are different ways forgetting happens. One of best known is the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. Imagine you're learning a new dance routine.
Okay.
You'll probably forget some of the steps pretty quickly at first,
Right? Yeah, probably.
but the ones you keep practicing, those will stick with you.
Makes sense.
That's basically the forgetting curve in action. Forgetting happens quickly at first, but then it kind of levels off over time.
Oh, that's a good analogy. So what actually causes that forgetting in the first place?
Well, psychologists usually talk about three main pauses: encoding failure, storage decay, and retrieval failure.
Okay.
Encoding failure is when information doesn't actually get processed properly into our memory. It's like you write something down on a sticky note, but then you lose the sticky note before you can put it somewhere safe. The information was never actually stored.
So it's not even that it's gone, it's that it never got embedded properly in the first place.
Right. Storage decay is the idea that memories fade over time if they're not accessed or used, like a path in the woods that gets overgrown if nobody walks on it.
Oh, that's a good one. So the more we revisit a memory, the stronger that past becomes. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And then there's retrieval failure.
Retrieval failure.
And that's when we can't access a memory, even though it actually still stored in our brains.
Like when you have something on the tip of your tongue?
Exactly. That is the classic example, like knowing that a book is in the library, but you can't remember the title or the author to find it.
Oh, the worst. So frustrating.
It is.
Oof.
And often what we need are those retrieval cues,
Retrieval cues.
little hints or triggers that can help us access that memory. Like if someone gives you a few keywords about that book, you might suddenly remember the title.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Okay.
So forgetting isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just our brains managing all the information we're bombarded with every day.
Right. Now, another topic you were interested in is parenting styles. How different approaches impact children.
Yes. With all the different philosophies out there these days, it's hard to know what to do.
It is. Well, psychologists have identified four main parenting styles: authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful.
Okay.
Each one has its own set of characteristics and potential impact on kids.
Okay, let's break those down. What makes each style unique?
Imagine parenting styles as points on a compass. Authoritarian parents are kind of like strict drill sergeants. They really value obedience, they impose rules, and they don't often offer much explanation for their decisions. Think, because I said so.
Oh, yeah. I know that type.
Now, authoritative parents are also demanding, but in a different way. They set expectations and boundaries, for sure, but they're also really responsive to their kids' needs and feelings. They explain the reasoning behind the rules and encourage open communication.
Oh, I like that. It seems much healthier.
It's often considered the most effective approach, that balance of structure with warmth and support. Then you have permissive parents. They're very lenient, make few demands, rarely enforce rules. They tend to give in to their kids' desires quite a bit.
Oh, the cool mom or cool dad type.
Exactly. They might be super loving and involved, but they often struggle with setting those boundaries. So the kids can struggle with self-control and responsibility.
Okay, I can see how that could be an issue. And then there's neglectful parenting, which I'm guessing is not good.
No. Neglectful parents are generally uninvolved and emotionally distant.
That's sad.
Yeah. They don't provide much structure, guidance, or support, And that lack of attention and responsiveness can be really hard on the child.
Yeah, I can imagine. So it seems like parenting styles can have a huge influence on a child's development.
They absolutely do. Now, one famous study that sheds some light on this whole nature versus nurture debate is the marshmallow test. Have you heard of that?
Oh yeah, the marshmallow test. It's all about kids resisting temptation.
Right. Researchers gave 4-year-olds a choice. Eat one marshmallow now or wait a few minutes and get two.
Okay.
The kids who could delay gratification, who resisted that immediate temptation, they actually tended to have better outcomes later in life. Things like higher college graduation rates, higher incomes, fewer issues with addiction.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. It suggests that the ability to control impulses and think about the long-term consequences of our actions is incredibly valuable.
That's so interesting. It makes you wonder, can delayed gratification actually be taught?
That is an excellent question. We'll have to dive into that later. But for now, let's shift gears and explore another fascinating realm, the world of sleep and dreams. You had some questions about those crazy dreams we have, right?
I do. I'm so curious about what goes on in our brains when we're asleep. It's like entering a different reality.
It is. Sleep and dreams have fascinated people for centuries. We spend a third of our lives asleep, yet for a long time the purpose of sleep was a total mystery.
So what have scientists figured out about why we sleep? Is it just about resting our bodies?
It's so much more than that. Sleep serves all these vital functions, both physically and mentally. Physically, it's like taking your car in for a tune-up. Your muscles are rebuilding, energy stores are replenishing, your immune system gets a boost.
So it's like a nightly reset button for our bodies.
Exactly. But it's also crucial for our mental well-being. It plays a key role in memory consolidation, helping process and store all the information from the day, like your brain's organizing and filing all those mental documents.
I can definitely relate to that. I know I'm useless when I'm sleep deprived. It's like my brain is running on fumes.
You and everybody else. Sleep deprivation can seriously affect our cognitive abilities. Things like attention, memory, decision-making, all that suffers.
Wow.
And chronic sleep deprivation can even increase the risk of serious health problems, like heart disease, diabetes, obesity.
Okay, so we really shouldn't underestimate the power of a good night's sleep. But what about dreams?
Dreams.
What's the deal with those bizarre scenarios our brains create?
There are so many theories about why we dream. Some researchers believe dreams help us process emotions and experiences from the day. Like our unconscious mind is working through unresolved issues.
Like our brain's version of therapy.
In a way, yes. Other theories suggest dreams might help with memory consolidation or even boost creativity. Some even think dreams might not have any real purpose at all, just a byproduct of the brain's activity during sleep.
So it's still a bit of a mystery, huh?
It is, but no matter what the purpose is, dreams can definitely offer us these fascinating insights into our inner world.
Okay, so we know sleep is super important, and we dream during certain phases of sleep, but what actually happens in our brains when we drift off?
As we fall asleep, our brain waves slow down, and we go through these different stages of sleep.
Okay,
Each one is characterized by distinct brainwave patterns, so it's not like we just suddenly switch off. It's more like a gradual descent into sleep.
makes sense.
The first stage is called NREM1, which stands for non-rapid eye movement sleep. It's a very light sleep, where you might experience those sudden muscle spasms, the hypnic jerks.
Oh, I've had those. It's like you're startled awake for a second.
Exactly. Then we move into NREM2. Brain waves slow down further, heart rate and breathing become more regular.
So we're starting to get into a deeper sleep now.
Yes. Then comes NREM3. This is the deepest stage, often called slow wave sleep because the brain waves are very slow and rhythmic. This is when our bodies do most of that repair and restoration work.
Okay, so if I'm totally exhausted, I'm probably spending a lot of time in REM 3.
Probably. And then after about an hour of cycling through these NREM stages, we enter a whole other phase, REM sleep.
Ah, REM sleep. That's when we dream.
Exactly. Brain activity increases, breathing gets more rapid and irregular, our eyes dart back and forth behind closed eyelids.
So our brains are basically awake, but our bodies are paralyzed. That's kind of creepy when you think about it.
It is a bit of a paradox, and it's during this REM sleep that those vivid, crazy dreams tend to occur.
So we cycle through these stages throughout the night.
We do. A typical sleep cycle lasts about 90 minutes, and we go through several cycles each night. The amount of time we spend in each stage varies, but as the night progresses, we tend to spend less time in deep sleep and more time in REM.
That is fascinating. It's like our brains have their own internal clock for these sleep cycles.
They do.
Speaking of clocks, Is our internal clock what makes some people night owls and others early birds?
It definitely plays a role. Our internal clock, also known as our circadian rhythm, is influenced by our genes, our environment, and our age. And this rhythm can make some people naturally more alert in the morning,
Hmm.
while others, like yourself, maybe peak later in the day. It's like our bodies are tuned to different time zones.
That explains a lot. I've always been a night owl, but my partner's up at the crack of dawn.
A common situation. Now, you also asked a question about a topic that's closely related to sleep and dreams, hypnosis.
Yes. I've always been intrigued by hypnosis,
It's a
how it seems to alter our consciousness, our behavior. It almost seems like magic.
It's definitely not mind control, as some people might believe.
Okay, good.
People under hypnosis, they still have their own will and values, but they're simply more open to suggestions and instructions, like they enter a more relaxed and receptive state of mind.
Where suggestions have a stronger impact.
Exactly. And there's growing evidence that hypnosis can be helpful for things like pain management,
Oh, wow.
reducing anxiety, breaking bad habits.
Really? I've heard of people using it to quit smoking or lose weight. Does that actually work?
It can. A hypnotist might suggest to a smoker that cigarettes suddenly taste repulsive, or that the urge to smoke simply disappears.
Wow.
And for someone struggling with weight loss, they might suggest feelings of fullness after smaller meals.
That's incredible. So it's like hypnosis uses the power of suggestion to influence our subconscious mind. Is that the basic idea?
That's the idea. And while it doesn't work for everyone, it can be surprisingly effective for some individuals.
This makes me wonder about the potential of our subconscious minds. How much could we influence our thoughts and feelings and behaviors if we could really tap into that hidden realm?
That is a question that has fascinated psychologists for a very long time. While we learned a lot about the subconscious, there's still so much we don't know.
It's like there's this vast, unexplored territory within our own minds.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, you also had some questions about our senses.
Yes. I'm always curious about how much our brains contribute to what we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch. It's not just about those sensory organs picking up information, right?
Right. Our brains play this huge role in shaping and interpreting the sensory input we receive.
Okay.
And one of the most fascinating things about perception is how it can be influenced by our expectations, experiences, and even our emotions.
Ooh, that sounds intriguing. Can you give me an example of how that works?
Imagine you're walking through a forest at night and you hear rustling in the bushes.
Okay. A little spooky.
If you're feeling anxious, you might perceive that rustling as a dangerous animal, even if it's just the wind blowing through leaves.
Oh, for sure. Your heart starts racing. You immediately jump to the worst case scenario.
Right. Your emotional state is influencing your perception of the situation.
Wow.
This happens all the time, sometimes in subtle ways. If you're expecting a phone call from someone, you might actually hear the phone ring, even if it hasn't.
Really?
Yeah. It's like our brains are constantly making predictions and interpretations based on our past experiences.
Okay, that makes sense, but it also means our perceptions aren't always totally accurate.
Exactly. And our brains can be tricked.
Tricks.
Our senses can be fooled. That's why optical illusions work. They take advantage of the shortcuts our brains make when they're processing visual information.
That's fascinating. It makes you wonder how much of what we perceive is actually real versus just our brain constructing it.
That's a question that has been debated for centuries. There's no easy answer there. But one thing's for sure, our perceptions are definitely shaped by this complex interplay of internal and external factors.
It's like our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world using every piece of information they have.
Exactly. And this whole process of perception is incredibly dynamic and adaptable. It really speaks to the amazing capabilities of our brains.
Speaking of amazing capabilities, let's talk about a sense that's often overlooked but is incredibly powerful. Our sense of touch.
Touch is our most intimate sense, wouldn't you say?
I think so.
It's the first one to develop in the womb, and it plays a vital role in our well-being, both physical and emotional, throughout our lives.
So it's about way more than just feeling physical sensations.
Right. Touch is essential for social bonding, emotional regulation, even cognitive development.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that important.
Well, think about the power of a hug. A hug can convey warmth, comfort, and support in a way that words often just can't.
Oh, absolutely.
And for infants, touch is crucial for their development. Babies who are held and cuddled, they thrive both physically and emotionally.
It's like touch provides this sense of security and connection.
Exactly. There's even research showing that massage therapy can reduce stress and anxiety, improve sleep, boosts the immune system.
That's incredible. We really do underestimate the power of touch.
I think so. It's a sense worth cultivating
Yeah.
and appreciating.
Okay, I'm definitely going to make a conscious effort to incorporate more touch into my life.
Excellent. Now let's move on to another fascinating aspect of touch. Pain.
Pain.
Often seen as this negative sensation, but pain actually serves a really vital protective function.
Right. It alerts us to danger, helps us avoid injury, like our body's alarm system.
Exactly. But the experience of pain is much more complex than just a simple physical sensation. It can be influenced by our thoughts, our emotions, and even our cultural backgrounds.
So two people could experience the same level of physical pain, but they might perceive it in very different ways.
Absolutely. Think about athletes who endured intense pain during training or competitions.
Hmm.
Their focus, their determination can actually help them to manage that pain, even minimize their perception of it.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like their mental state overrides the physical sensation.
In a way, yes. And cultural norms play a role too. In some cultures, it's considered really stoic to endure pain without complaining,
Yeah.
while in others, it's totally fine to express pain openly.
So it really shows how much our perception of pain is shaped by the context in which we experience it.
Absolutely. And understanding this is crucial for developing effective pain management strategies. It's not just about masking the pain, it's about addressing the psychological and social factors that can amplify or lessen our perception of it.
Okay, so it's a more holistic approach, looking at the whole picture.
Exactly. And there are all kinds of different approaches that can be helpful, from mindfulness techniques to cognitive behavioral therapy to acupuncture. It really varies.
This deep dive has given me a new appreciation for the complexity of pain and touch. It's not just about those physical sensations, it's about how our brains interpret and make meaning of them.
You got it. Now let's move on to another sense that's incredibly evocative and also deeply personal.
Yeah.
Smell.
Okay, I'm ready. Smell is so fascinating to me. It can trigger such powerful memories and emotions.
Isn't it?
It's amazing how a single whiff of a certain scent can instantly transport you back to a specific time or place.
It's true. The olfactory system, the part of our brain that processes smells, it connects directly to the limbic system, the emotional center of our brains.
Oh, wow.
And that explains why certain scents can evoke such strong memories and feelings.
So smells basically bypass our conscious mind and go straight to our emotional core.
Exactly. This connection has fascinated scientists and artists for centuries. Perfumers, for example, they've long understood the power of scents to influence our mood and behavior.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Certain smells like fresh baked bread or freshly cut grass, those can just take me right back to my childhood. It's like time travel through smell.
That's a great example of what's known as the Proust phenomenon. It's named after the French novelist Marcel Proust. He wrote so beautifully about how the scent and taste of a Madeleine cookie brought back this flood of childhood memories.
Oh, I've definitely experienced that.
Yeah.
It's like our senses have a direct line to our memory banks.
They do. And this connection highlights just how important smell is in our lives, even if we don't always realize it.
So smell is more than just about enjoying those pleasant aromas or detecting bad odors. It's actually shaping our experiences, influencing our behavior.
Exactly. Now let's move on to another sense that's very closely linked to smell. Taste.
Okay, I'm ready for that. Taste is essential for survival, obviously, but it's also a source of so much pleasure.
Absolutely. And just like smell, taste is influenced by a whole bunch of different factors. Our genes, our experiences, even our culture.
So it's not just all about our taste buds, right? Our brains play a role too.
Definitely. Our brains are crucial in how we perceive and interpret tastes. For example, our expectations can have a huge impact on our experience of a particular food or drink.
Oh, you mean like if you're told that a wine is expensive, you might enjoy it more, even if it's actually a cheap bottle?
Exactly. It's a classic example of how our beliefs can shape our perceptions.
Wow.
And cultural backgrounds also play a role. What might be delicious in one culture could be completely unappetizing in another.
Oh, that's so true. I've had my fair share of unusual culinary experiences in my travels.
And this diversity extends to our taste preferences as well. Some people are super tasters with a heightened sensitivity to bitter flavors. Others have a huge sweet tooth. And these variations are influenced by both genetics and experience.
It's incredible how much variety there is in the human experience,
Yeah,
even down to our basic senses.
it's true. Now let's move on to a sense that's essential for our physical movement and coordination. Our sense of balance, also known as the vestibular sense.
Okay, now you've got me intrigued. I know balance is important, but I've never really thought of it as a separate sense.
It's often taken for granted, but our vestibular sense plays this crucial role in our ability to walk, to stand, to move through the world without falling over. And it's all thanks to this incredible system of fluid-filled canals and sensory receptors in our inner ears.
So our inner ears are constantly monitoring our body's position and movement.
Exactly. These vestibular receptors, they send signals to our brainstem, which coordinates our muscle movements to keep us balanced and upright.
That is amazing. It's crazy to think that whole intricate process is happening without us even realizing it.
It is. And when our vestibular system gets disrupted, we experience those feelings of dizziness, nausea, or even vertigo.
Oh yeah, I've totally felt that after spinning around too many times or riding a roller coaster.
Right. Those experiences overload our vestibular system. They create this mismatch between what our inner ears sense and what our eyes see.
It makes you really appreciate that delicate balance our brains have to maintain
Hmm.
just to keep us oriented and stable in the world.
It does.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about what's often considered our most dominant sense, vision.
Okay. Vision is obviously crucial for just navigating the world, but is it really as simple as our eyes just capturing images?
Not at all. Our brains play this huge role in processing and interpreting all that visual information. And just like with our other senses, our expectations, experiences, and emotions can influence what we see.
Can you give me an example of that?
Let's say you're looking at a cloud formation.
Okay.
One person might see a bunny rabbit.
Okay.
Another person might see a dragon. Their individual experiences and interpretations shape what they actually perceive.
Oh, I've had that experience. We'll be looking at the same cloud, but my friend will see something totally different.
Exactly. And this process of interpretation is happening all the time, even when we're not aware of it. Our brains are constantly making predictions and filling in gaps based on our previous experiences.
It's like our brains are creating this personalized reality based on our own unique perspective.
In a way, yes. So let's break down the actual journey light takes from the outside world to our brains.
Okay, I'm ready. Light enters our eyes, and then what?
First, it passes through the cornea. That's the clear outer layer of the eye.
Okay.
Then it travels through the pupil. That's the opening in the center of the iris, the colored part of your eye that controls how much light enters.
So the iris is kind of like the aperture on a camera,
Mm-hmm.
adjusting to different lighting conditions.
Great analogy. After the pupil, the light passes through the lens. That focuses the light onto the retina at the back of the eye.
Oh yeah, the retina. It's like a movie screen, right?
Exactly. And it's covered in millions of these light-sensitive cells called photoreceptors that actually capture the light.
So they're like the film in a camera.
Yeah, good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And there are two types of photoreceptors, rods and cones.
Okay.
Rods handle our peripheral vision and our ability to see in low light. Cones are concentrated in the center of the retina, and they're responsible for color vision and seeing fine detail.
So cones are like high-definition vision, and rods are more like black and white night vision.
Perfect analogy. When light hits these photoreceptors, it triggers a chemical reaction, which then sends signals down the optic nerve to the brain.
So the optic nerve is like the cable transmitting all those visual signals.
Exactly. And then the brain takes over, processing those signals and turning them into the images we see.
That is incredible. So much happens in a split second between the light hitting our eyes and our brain actually interpreting those signals.
It's remarkable. This process of visual perception is so complex.
Yeah.
And involves so many different parts of our brains all working together.
Well, this deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for our visual system. It's not just about our eyes. It's about the amazing processing power of our brains.
Absolutely. Now let's move on to a topic that's closely related to vision, attention. Intrigued? Good. Attention might seem like a really basic concept, but it's actually a lot more than just focusing on something. It's not just staring intently.
Right.
Attention is this whole cognitive process where your brain selects certain information and filters out other stuff. Imagine a spotlight. It highlights what's important at any given moment.
So our attention is always shifting based on our goals and interests.
Exactly. And this ability to choose what we focus on, that's crucial for survival.
Right.
It lets us focus on what matters and block out all the distractions.
But it also means we might miss things right in front of us if we're not paying attention. Like if you're engrossed in a book, You might not notice someone talking to you.
You're exactly right. And psychologists have actually done these fascinating experiments that show this. Have you heard of the gorilla experiment?
The gorilla experiment. No.
So in this experiment, participants watched a video of people passing a basketball. Their task was to count how many passes were made by the players wearing white shirts.
Okay, sounds pretty straightforward.
It does, but here's the thing. While they were busy counting, a person in a gorilla suit walked right through the middle of the scene.
What?
And a lot of the participants missed it completely.
Wait, they missed a gorilla? How is that even possible?
They were so focused on counting those passes that they became blind to the gorilla. It's called inattentional blindness. And it really highlights how limited our attention can be. We can only really focus on so much at once.
Wow. That's incredible. And kind of scary. It makes you realize how much we might be missing if we're constantly distracted.
You're right. And these days, with all our devices, notifications, and everything else going on around us, it's easier than ever to have our attention pulled in a million different directions. Like our brains are just fragmented.
So what can we do about it? How do
Yeah.
we actually improve our attention and focus in a world that's constantly demanding it?
One key strategy is practicing mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
It's all about paying attention to the present moment without judgment, just being aware of your thoughts, feelings, and sensations without getting swept away by them.
So just trying to be more present, less reactive to all those distractions.
Exactly. Research actually shows that mindfulness practices like meditation can really help improve attention, reduce stress, and even boost your emotional well-being, like you're training your brain to be more present.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Are there any other practical tips for improving focus?
Of course. Creating a more focused environment can also be super helpful. Think about all the things that compete for your attention. Emails, social media, text messages, maybe the TV's blaring in the background. All these distractions can make it really hard to concentrate.
Oh, I'm so guilty of that. Trying to work with my phone right next to me, checking emails, and it's no wonder I can't get anything done.
It's so common these days. Creating a more focused environment might mean turning off those notifications, putting your phone away, or finding a quiet workspace where you won't be interrupted. Just setting yourself up for success, basically.
Such good advice. It's amazing how much our environment impacts our ability to focus.
It really does. And remember, improving your attention, it's a skill. It takes practice, just like anything else. The more you practice being present, the better you'll get at it.
Well said. I'm already thinking about some changes I can make.
Good. Now let's switch gears again. We've talked about vision, touch, and smell. What about hearing?
Okay, I'm listening. Hearing is essential for communication, obviously.
Okay, sure.
But I'm guessing there's more to it than just our ears picking up sounds.
You got it. Audition, which is the formal term for hearing, is actually this whole process that involves both our ears and our brains working together. And just like with the other senses, our experiences and expectations can really influence what we hear.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about sound waves hitting our eardrums. It's also about how our brains make sense of those signals.
Exactly. Our brains play this crucial role in filtering, processing, and then interpreting those sound waves, turning them into those meaningful sounds we understand.
Okay, can you walk me through how that happens? What's the journey a sound takes?
Absolutely. It all starts with sound waves, those vibrations traveling through the air. They enter our ear canal, and then they hit the eardrum, making it vibrate.
So the eardrum is like a tiny drum.
That's a great way to visualize it. Then those vibrations pass on to 3 teeny tiny bones in your middle ear: the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup.
Wow, I remember learning about those in school.
They amplify the vibrations and send them to the cochlea,
The cochlea.
which is that spiral-shaped structure filled with fluid in your inner ear.
So that's where things get interesting.
Exactly. The cochlea has thousands of tiny hair cells.
Hair cells.
They're the sensory receptors for hearing. When those vibrations get to the cochlea, they cause the fluid to move. And that bends those tiny hair cells.
So the movement of the hair cells is what triggers the
You
hearing.
got it. And the bending of the hair cells generates electrical signals,
Okay.
and those are sent to the brain via the auditory nerve.
The auditory nerve is like the messenger carrying those signals to the brain.
Exactly. And then the brain decodes those signals, identifies the source of the sound, and interprets what it all means.
That's a lot of steps.
Yeah,
It's incredible how much is happening just for us to hear something.
it's pretty amazing. And you know, another interesting thing about hearing is how our brains learn to recognize and understand all those different sounds.
Right, like how do we know the difference between a bird singing and, say, a car horn?
It's a process that begins very early in life. Babies are born able to hear lots of sounds, but they haven't yet learned what those sounds mean. As they grow and they hear those sounds over and over, their brains start making connections, those neural pathways.
Like building a library of sounds.
Exactly. And it continues throughout our lives. Think about learning a new language. At first, those sounds are unfamiliar,
Right.
hard to tell apart. But with practice, our brains start to recognize the patterns. We learn to distinguish those sounds.
It's like our brains are constantly updating that sound library with new information.
Exactly. And it's this ability to learn and adapt that helps us navigate that complex world of sound.
This whole deep dive has given me a whole new appreciation for my sense of hearing. It's not just our ears taking in those sounds, it's our brains actively making meaning of them.
Exactly. And speaking of making meaning, let's move on to language. You had a couple of questions about how we learn and use language, right?
I do. Language is such an important part of what makes us human. It's how we communicate, connect with each other, express ourselves. I'm really curious about the psychology behind it all.
It really is a remarkable ability. We can share such complex thoughts and ideas through language. And language acquisition, how we learn to do all that, to speak, understand, read, write, that's a really fascinating field.
So how do babies go from having zero language skills to becoming fluent speakers? It's kind of magical.
It does feel like magic. There are lots of different theories about how language develops, but one of the most influential is the nativist theory from Noam Chomsky.
Okay.
He's a linguist. He argues that humans are born with this innate capacity for language, a language instinct, if you will. Our brains are pre-wired to learn it.
So like a blueprint for language, we're born with it.
That's the basic idea. Chomsky believed in a universal grammar. It's a set of underlying rules that are present in all languages. And he said that being exposed to language during childhood is what triggers these innate abilities. It's how children can learn language so fast.
So we're not just blank slates then when it comes to language. We have this pre-existing structure in our brains ready to go.
Exactly. And research actually backs this up. Babies start picking up on those language patterns really early. Before they can even speak, they're tuned in to those sounds and rhythms.
Like their little brains are soaking up language like sponges.
Great analogy. And while the nativist theory has been really influential, there are other theories too, like the interactionist theory.
Okay.
That one stresses how important social interaction is for language development. It says children learn language by talking with their caregivers, family, and people in their world.
So it's a mix of nature and nurture working together. The way our brains are wired plus our environment all contribute to how we learn language.
Exactly. It's not one or the other. It's both.
It's fascinating. I'm looking at language in a whole new way. It's not just words and grammar. It's about our brains, experiences, and social connections all coming together.
I agree. And speaking of those connections, let's talk about another fundamental aspect of being human, social psychology.
Yes. I always wonder how we change our behavior depending on who we're with. Like we're constantly adapting.
Great observation. Social psychology looks at how our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all influenced by other people, whether they're actually there or not.
So it's not just about how we interact with others. It's also about how those interactions make us change how we act.
You got it. For example, have you ever noticed that you might behave differently around your boss than you do with your close friends?
Oh, 100%. Like we're playing different roles depending on who's around.
Exactly. It's called self-presentation.
Yeah.
We're always managing the impressions we give off, often without even realizing it. We adjust our behavior to fit in with the expectations and norms of that specific situation.
Okay, that makes sense. But are there other factors at play besides just wanting to make a good impression?
Of course. Conformity is one really fascinating area of research. It's the tendency for us to adjust our thoughts and feelings to match those of a group.
Oh, like when everyone in a group agrees on something, but you have doubts, you just go along with it anyway so you don't cause a scene.
Exactly. There was this classic study on conformity by Solomon Asch back in the 50s. He had participants judge the lengths of lines.
Good.
It was easy. But here's the twist. Most of the people in the group were actually actors who were told to give the wrong answer on purpose.
So they created this situation where everyone was pressured to conform to the wrong answer.
Exactly. And a surprisingly high number of the actual participants agreed with the group, even though they knew the group's answer was wrong. It really shows how powerful social pressure can be on our choices.
Wow, that's wild. It makes you think about how much other people influence us without us even realizing it.
It's a powerful force, and it's not always bad, to be fair. Conformity can help us fit in, avoid conflicts, and keep things harmonious. But we should be aware of it so we're not just blindly following the crowd.
Right. It's about finding that balance between fitting in and being true to yourself.
Exactly. And another super interesting area of social psychology is obedience to authority.
All right.
Have you ever wondered why people will follow orders even when they know those orders are wrong?
Yes. It seems like such a dark side of human nature.
It can be. One of the most well-known studies on this is the Milgram experiment, done by Stanley Milgram back in the 60s.
Okay.
Participants thought they were taking part in a study on learning and memory. They were told to deliver electric shocks to another person who was actually just an actor pretending to be in pain.
Wait, they thought they were shocking a real person.
They did. The shocks were fake, of course, but they didn't know that. And the guy running the experiment, he's wearing a lab coat, acting all official. He kept telling the participants to keep giving those shocks, even when the actor was yelling, begging them to stop.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Did they actually do it?
A surprisingly high number of the participants kept going, all the way to the highest level of shock.
Wow.
It showed how easily people will obey authority figures, even if it goes against their own morals.
It makes you think about all those times in history when people followed terrible orders without questioning them.
It's a reminder that we can all be susceptible to those social forces. We need to develop our critical thinking skills and really pay attention to our own ethics.
It's about being aware and making our own choices.
Exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, you also had a question about happiness. What makes people happy?
It's a question for the ages. Is it all about money, possessions, and fame?
Well, research shows that those things aren't as important as we might think. Don't get me wrong, having our basic needs met is important.
Right.
But real, genuine happiness, that seems to come from things like having strong relationships, meaningful activities, and a sense of purpose.
So it's more about those inner qualities, those experiences, and not so much about those external things.
Exactly. And one really interesting finding is that our happiness levels, they're actually pretty stable over time. Even after big life events, we tend to go back to our baseline level of happiness.
So even if you win the lottery, you might get this surge of happiness, but eventually you'll just go back to how you usually feel.
That's basically it. It's called the hedonic treadmill. It suggests that if we want lasting happiness, we need to focus on building those positive habits, creating those positive mindsets, and not just chase after quick bursts of pleasure.
So what are some things we can actually do to boost our happiness?
Well, research shows that things like practicing gratitude, nurturing those positive relationships, being kind to others, finding meaning in our lives, that can all contribute to a greater sense of happiness.
So it's about focusing on what we're grateful for, connecting with others, making a positive difference.
Exactly. It's a shift in perspective from what we don't have to what we do, from what we want to, what we can give.
I love how psychology can teach us not just about how our brains work, but also how we can live better lives.
It's a really powerful tool. It helps us understand ourselves better, our relationships, the world around us. With that understanding, we can make choices that lead to a better life, more well-being.
This deep dive has been so inspiring. I'm already thinking about how I can use these insights in my own life.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, learning and exploring never truly ends. There's always more to discover about ourselves and this amazing human mind.
Wow, this deep dive has been incredible. We've explored so much. Psychological disorders, the power of our senses, the magic of language, and even happiness. It's amazing how much we can learn about ourselves through psychology.
It really is. Psychology gives us this whole new perspective on ourselves and the world. And with that understanding, I think we can make better choices, ones that lead to greater well-being, a richer understanding of the human experience.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has made me so much more aware of my own thoughts, feelings, and how I behave. And honestly, I'm excited to keep learning more.
That's great. And remember, that journey of self-discovery and exploration, it never really ends. There's always something new to learn and appreciate about ourselves and the world around us.
So true. Well, thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the world of psychology. It's been a pleasure.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for sharing your curiosity and questions with us. We hope this deep dive sparked some new insights and that you'll continue exploring this fascinating world of the human mind with us. Until next time, keep diving deep.